The first thing you'll notice about Indivisible is its beauty. The characters, the environments, the animations, everything sings with a handcrafted harmony that Lab Zero Games is well known for. However, for me, it wasn't the art, the swift and engaging battle system, or the Metroidvania-style exploration that motivated my play. It was the emotional growth of the protagonists and heartfelt connections between them. This review will be split up into 4 main sections of combat, exploration, story, and anything else I failed to cover in the other parts. The combat system is fairly unique and engrossing. Ajna gets stronger as she learns new abilities and upgrades her attack and defense. Most fights are quick and full of flair, while remaining challenging if you don't pay attention. There is skill akin to a very simple fighting game that rewards well-timed button inputs and smart move selections. Ajna will also gain various equipment and powers to aid her while exploring Indivisible's sprawling maps. I do have some issues with this portion of the gameplay, which I'll go over, but I do think the game is better for having these Metroidvania elements than if it didn't. So join me as I examine Ajna and her friend's journey. What starts as a tale of revenge soon becomes a story of self-discovery, overcoming loneliness, and righting the mistakes of the past. Ajna learns who she is and how to forgive her shortcomings. It's a beautiful game with a lot of heart. Combat in Indivisible is snappy and primarily party and skill based. There is no equipment to fuss with, nor are there menus displaying items or spells. Indivisible's combat is truly combat only. What do I mean by that? At no point while playing through Ajna's journey will you need to worry about gaining money to purchase gear, or making sure the party is well stocked on items. The only concern the player needs to have is who to bring to the brawl, and getting better at button timings. With around 20 characters to pick from, filling out the 3 battle slots next to Ajna could have seemed overwhelming. However, Lab Zero Games did a great job doling out characters at a regular pace that allowed plenty of time for experimentation. And you'll really want to experiment to find the combinations that fit your playstyle, or in a few instances, a particular battle. All party members are easily switched out both inside and outside of battle. When highlighted in the party menu, a character's stats appear, which includes HP, attack, and speed. A simple 5-star rating system quickly identifies the basic function this party member brings to combat. For example, Razmi has low HP, low speed, and really high attack. This immediately tells the player that Razmi is not a frontline fighter, she's a glass cannon, and will most likely need to be paired with a faster character or 2 to supplement her slow, powerful abilities. However, that's just the surface looking at Razmi. Let's examine her deeper to suss out the hidden depth Lab Zero Games snuck into Indivisible. Each character is assigned a face button based on their position set in the party. Once in combat, the player can see these assigned buttons charge up beneath each character. The number of buttons available is dependent on how upgraded is Ajna's attack, which I'll touch on later. Each button instance is an available ability. The more buttons available, the more moves that character can perform. So again, let's look at Razmi. If the player simply presses her button, she will perform a basic attack. However, if the player presses the button and a direction on the joystick or directional pad, she can perform other moves. Pressing down unleashes an attack that slows enemies. Pressing up can create a launcher. Left and right add a variation to her basic attack. Using this knowledge in combination with other characters can create chains of attacks leading to big combo bonuses. Every character will have their own unique build. Some barely attack but instead heal or boost stats. Some set traps to prevent enemy attacks. Others only have basic attacks, but those attacks hit especially hard or for multiple hits. There is a lot of variety to be had. As the player attacks and defends, the Iddhi meter at the top of the screen will fill up, much like a super meter in fighting games. A player can choose to use up different amounts of the meter to initiate special moves for their team members. Using Rosmi again, when the player uses only 1 bar of Iddhi, Rosmi will heal the party for a small amount. But if the player decides to use 2 or more Iddhi bars, Rosmi will unleash a devastating firestorm. Understanding what each party member can do with different Iddhi bars and when to use them is crucial to being successful within Indivisible's combat system, especially since there are no items or other mechanics to bail the player out of a bad decision. I've talked a lot about what the player can do to bring the damage to the enemies, but what happens when the enemies fight back? Well, those button assignments aren't just for attacking. If an enemy initiates an attack, the button converts to defense. Players can hold down the corresponding button to the character getting attacked and reduce the amount of damage taken. Skilled players will press the button at just the right time to not only negate the attack, but heal the affected party member. Additionally, performing excellent defense will raise the Iddhi Gauge, so when the enemy attack is finished, the player can drop the hammer. To mix the gameplay up, some enemies will attack the entire group at once, or different parts of the attack affect different areas of the battlefield. Learning when and how to defend enemy attacks is fundamental to surviving. Enemies hit very hard when not defended properly. There are some other tricks the enemies have, but I'll leave that for you to discover. Now that I've gone over how the general mechanics work, what do I think of the combat? Frankly, it's excellent. Very rarely did I get frustrated with battles, and I often sought them out just to experience them. I experimented a lot with different party configurations, and while I did settle into 2 or 3 groups, I had no issues mixing it up if the situation required it. I would say the last time I had this much fun with a JRPG battle system was Grandia or Battle Chasers Night War. A big reason I enjoyed this so much was I never felt the battles were unfair or that I needed to grind for experience. If I ever got frustrated with a battle, it was because I didn't understand the enemy movesets or my party makeup wasn't conducive to victory. It was my fault I struggled rather than the game's design. The same cannot be said for Indivisible's exploration and platforming. Exploration in Indivisible is simultaneously great and baffling. For every smart decision Lab Zero Games made, they produced a problem to completely counteract the fun they initially created. Let's break down each part of exploration to show you what I mean. To start, the maps in Indivisible, besides being gorgeous and full of detail, are massive and interconnected. There is a lot of exploration in any given area, and the number of nooks and crannies to investigate only increases as Ajna gains more movement options. Typically, this is a good thing. I enjoy searching for hidden rooms or collectibles in games, and the prospect of turning these areas upside down to shake out their goodies was something I looked forward to. You'll notice I said, was something I looked forward to. The problem with Indivisible's gigantic maps is twofold. First, all but 2 maps are connected to towns filled with NPCs, storylines, side content, and quest givers. This often means running through large portions of a town or dungeon to reach someone or some location you need to get to. Even after unlocking fast travel, I often had to run, jump, and dash for a wearisome amount of time. Large maps are not inherently bad, but their implementation here makes them more of a hindrance than a joy. This only gets worse as more abilities and characters get unlocked. On one hand, gaining new abilities for Ajna is a treat. Different air and ground dashes, sprinting, ground slams, there is an enjoyable variety of moves in Ajna's arsenal, and like any good Metroidvania, unlocking a new skill will prompt your brain to say, aha, now I can go over here. That feeling of piecing together the puzzle of a map is satisfying, and to Indivisible's credit, some of the pathways and puzzle rooms are ingenious. But, like I stated earlier, I often didn't feel like traveling all the way through an area I'd been through multiple times to get to my aha area, simply because it was a pain in the ass. And that's really unfortunate. If Lab Zero Games had broken up some of the maps into smaller areas with more fast travel locations, exploration could have been much less cumbersome. In another weird decision, each main area of Indivisible is connected to another via condensed paths that are usually unlocked by the story or new abilities. In theory, shortcuts are vital to quickly moving from location to location in a Metroidvania game. However, Indivisible tosses all of this aside. The shortcuts are not useful for two reasons. The pathway to get to them is inconvenient, which defeats the whole purpose of their existence, and by the time the player can take advantage of them, fast travel exists. I'm honestly not sure why these so-called shortcuts exist at all, as they are far from a shortcut. A quick side note before jumping to my second issue with the maps, the only collectibles in the entire game are Ringsels, which are small red crystals scattered throughout the maps. There are 108 in total, and they are used to upgrade Ajna's attack and defense. It is very important to upgrade Ajna throughout the story, as battles will be much tougher without these upgrades. I brought up Ringsels because I was incredibly disappointed to discover these were the only items I needed to search for. I thought for sure I would need to locate unlockable traversal skills by finding a piece of equipment like Super Metroid or Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Nope, just Ringsels. Okay, point number 2 why I don't like the maps in Indivisible. Repetition. I know. Metroidvanias are built on learning areas inside and out, and the best way to do that is forcing the player through an area multiple times. The difference here? As I played, it felt like the reusing of areas was a budget or time constraint decision rather than a deliberate creative choice. I don't know what the developers went through to create these areas, and for all I know, how they are set up now was the intent, but I really don't get that feeling. This problem doesn't exist if the maps were either smaller and towns were relegated to their own areas, or the maps were filled with more collectibles and hidden areas to distract me from the repetition. The issues only compound in the second half of the story, as every single area is revisited at least once to progress the main questline. There is also the opportunity to complete optional party member side quests, which I did, and I found myself revisiting the exact same spots on a map multiple times for different characters. Don't get me wrong, I loved seeing the interactions and character growth, but my frustration slowly built toward the end of the game as NPCs or party members told me to return somewhere I just came from for another character. I only have one more thing to say regarding exploration. I really didn't like the controls, and they severely dampened my ability to love the more intense platforming sections like Path of Pain. For those who don't know my history as a gamer, I cut my teeth on the platformers of the NES, and the genre is one of my favorites. Games like Super Mario Bros., Celeste, Rayman, and Super Meat Boy are right up my alley. I say all of this to give you an idea of my competency in assessing a 2D platformer's controls. Indivisible simply never felt right to me. Others will disagree with me here, and that's completely valid. I just never connected with how Ajna moved. Button inputs felt imprecise. The rules surrounding her moveset didn't feel consistent or well explained. When I started my journey, I blamed myself for my lack of skill. By the end, I knew it wasn't me. There's no way, after the dozens of hours I poured into the game, I shouldn't be able to fly through some of the harder platforming sections. Again, some will disagree. That's fair. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. The controls are my second biggest complaint, behind revisiting the same areas again and again. Perhaps some of the nitpicking of the maps would be lessened if Ajna felt better to control. But that's how I feel about it. Speaking of feels... To begin, I absolutely adored this story and its characters. It's by no means perfect, but the charm of the world and lovable inhabitants more than make up for its shortcomings. A lot of my frustrations with Traversal were alleviated by the interactions at the end of my journeys. The bonds formed within the party and Ajna's growth from hard-headed heroine to understanding protector are big draws for playing Indivisible. That said, before I discuss anything related to Indivisible's story or characters, I want to issue a spoiler warning. I won't discuss everything in the game, but I will be touching on some of the major plot points, including the ending. If you think you might play this game, I recommend skipping to the timestamp displayed, as the story will definitely lose its punch if you know what's coming. Okay, let's dive in. I'm not going to do a recap of every story beat, there are wikis for that, and it would bloat this review. But it will be hard to talk about the game without a condensed summary of events. The TLDR of Indivisible is as follows. At the start of the game, Ender and a group of adventurers seal away Kala, a goddess who is trying to remake the world. On the way back from sealing her, Ender finds a baby and names her Ajna. 16 years later, Ender and Ajna's village, Ashwat, is burned to the ground by a group of soldiers led by a young man named Dar. Dar murders Ender. Ajna's latent powers awaken from the trauma. After defeating Dar, she mysteriously absorbs him into her mind. Stuck together, they proceed on a journey to find Ravanavar, the man who ordered Dar to attack Ashwat. Picking up more party members along the way, Ajna eventually confronts Ravanavar on Mount Sumeru, despite warnings from others in the group that she isn't ready for the battle. It turns out to be a trap, even though she is successful in killing Ravanavar. He wanted Ajna present to unseal Kala. At this point, Ajna learns she is a piece of Kala that fell away during the battle with Ender 16 years ago. Unable to control her rage and power, Ajna accidentally releases Kala from her prison, and a countdown to the world's destruction begins. With the help of Onglu, one of the original party members who sealed Kala with Ender, Ajna learns she must awaken the chakra gates scattered throughout Loka in order to fully rouse her powers. Traveling to every location in the game, Ajna unlocks the chakra gates. Unfortunately, her short-sightedness and selfish motivations cause her to do more harm than good to the people in each area she visits. After activating all the gates, Ajna decides to return to Mount Sumeru in order to battle Kala. The monks who live on the mountain and her party members, in particular a reformed Dar, desperately try to stop her. They feel she is too selfish and prone to anger. Ignoring their pleas, Ajna heads up to the summit for a second time. Once there, a gigantic battle ensues. Ajna, again, loses control of her power and transforms into a gigantic monster. In a last-ditch effort to stop Ajna from destroying the world, Dar sacrifices himself. Waking up a week later, Ajna discovers all of her friends were released from her mind and most returned to their respective homelands. Determined to make right what she wronged, Ajna travels the world correcting her mistakes and regaining the trust of her allies. In a much better mental and emotional state, Ajna decides to climb Mount Sumeru one more time to meet with Kala. During the final battle, Ajna only defends herself, and once Kala exhausts her energy, Ajna speaks with Kala. She convinces Kala to not destroy and remake the world, and instead merge with her and experience the joys and challenges the world has to offer. They merge. A post-credits scene shows a changed Ajna enjoying life. Everybody got that? Good. Let's talk about these characters. The main character of an RPG has a responsibility to move the plot along and provide an emotional anchor for the player. Ajna does this better than a lot of AAA games do for a variety of reasons. She begins her tale young and boisterous, seemingly held back by her backwater town and overbearing father, Ender. She wants to buck authority at every chance, and this rebellious streak will carry through the first third of the game. Initially, I connected with Ajna because other characters underestimated her at every opportunity. Ender doesn't think she's strong enough to be on her own, Dar thinks of her as a petulant child, even the main villain of this initial arc, Ravanavar, doesn't realize who or what she is until Ajna forces the issue. It's easy to root for her when everyone wants her to fail or treats her as insignificant. Throw in early game characters like Razmi and Ginseng and Honey to the mix, both of who support Ajna's more brash decisions, and Ajna starts checking all the boxes of an RPG hero. She's strong, not afraid of challenge, and charismatic, and if Indivisible carried forward like this, Ajna would be a likable, although shallow, leading character. However, lucky for us, Lab Zero Games had other plans. My attitude toward Ajna began to shift right before she kills Ravanavar. At this point, Ajna and team chased Ravanavar all the way to the top of Mount Sumeru with the motivation of revenge. Several party members warn Ajna that Ravanavar is baiting her, and that it would be wiser to hang back to assess his true goals. Ajna completely disregards this advice and proceeds with her single-minded goal of avenging Ender. This decision ends up releasing Kala, the maker and unmaker of the world, and undoes all the work Ender did in the prologue. Did she avenge her father? Yes, but her personal goal undermined the safety of everyone else. At this point, I thought Ajna would learn from this grave mistake and be more cautious. Nope, not really. Is she sorrowful about this turn of events? Definitely. She understands she released Kala and that she is most likely the one who can stop it. But she doesn't make the connection of this mistake and her brash decision making. After Agmu's advice to open the chakra gates throughout Loka, Ajna's poor decisions begin to multiply. Entering each new area presents local problems to Ajna and the party. As an example, in Kanul, Serpent Queen trapped all her people underground with a magical shield, essentially cutting them off from the outside world. The people are unhappy about their plight, but respect the decisions of their leader. Ajna, upon learning of the people's situation, immediately confronts Serpent Queen and demands the people of Kanul be set free. Others in Ajna's party ask her to pump the brakes and consider why Serpent Queen is doing what she's doing. Even while Serpent Queen is attempting to explain why she needs to shield her people, Ajna hand-waves the explanation away and begins a fight for Kanul's freedom. Ajna wins and moves along to the next chakra gate. Meanwhile, Kanul is thrown into turmoil because of their matriarch's defeat. It is only later that Ajna learns Serpent Queen ordered all her people underground because she found out Kala was released. She needed to put up a shield to protect her subjects because Ajna unsealed the biggest threat to the world's existence. Ajna's brash actions forced a reaction from the rest of the world, and instead of listening, she did what she felt was best, not what the inhabitants of that region wanted or needed. Often, Ajna's choices reminded me of what other JRPG protagonists would do, except Indivisible takes the extra step by showing the player the consequences of playing the hero instead of thinking things all the way through. In revisiting previous areas, a major gripe of mine in regards to exploration, Ajna makes the most strides to become a well-rounded person. She recognizes her mistakes, apologizes for them, and does her best to rectify the situation, even if that's not possible, which in some cases, it is not. I loved watching this young girl transform into a young adult. Her decisions became less self-centered, her willingness to fight tempered, she got stronger physically as the game progressed, picking up new abilities and allies, but her biggest growth came from not looking at what she thinks is best for everyone, and actually listening to what people want for themselves. It is rare to see that kind of personal growth in any game, let alone a JRPG, which traditionally hangs its hat on well-worn tropes. All this personal growth was the double-edged sword Indivisible became the longer I played it. I disliked having to retread ground from a traversal perspective, but I really looked forward to what the story presented to me. This matter compounded once party side quests unlocked, and the player finds themselves running back and forth in the same areas for a 4th, 5th, or 6th time. Credit where credit is due. I did all of the side quests. The characters really are that compelling to me. But if the characters didn't connect, I probably would have done far less content. One last subject on Ajna before moving on to side characters. The ending battle of Indivisible is one of the more unique endings I've seen in a JRPG. With all the build-up and mastery of characters I'd done up to that point, I was fully prepared for an all-out epic clash of my full party against a god, as you do in JRPGs. I did not expect Ajna to tell everyone to stay back and let her handle it alone. I also did not expect Ajna to only defend against Kala's onslaught. In this last battle, the player's defensive skills are put to the test. It took several tries for me to finally win out. I figured Ajna did this to weaken Kala enough to land a final blow, which probably says more about how RPGs trained me all these years than anything else. Instead, Ajna wanted to talk it out. She wanted to listen and speak. All the mistakes Ajna made in the past come full circle when she decides to wait, see what happens, and determine what pains Kala and why she wants to remake the world. This entire ending sequence was an excellent payoff for both Ajna, Kala, and the player. I really enjoyed seeing Ajna grow into a more caring individual, and when the stakes were the highest, She used that growth instead of resorting to her old ways. The ending really solidified Ajna's transformation, and if we start a new game plus, that transformation is manifested with her new form. Okay, I just spent a lot of time talking about Ajna, so let's spend a little bit of time on the other party members. All the party members have backstories and their own reasons for joining Ajna on their journey to defeat Ravanavar and then Kala. However, not all the characters are given equal screen time, or honestly, quality dialogue or stories. There seems to be a core story group for Indivisible, followed by a lesser combat-only group. Let me explain. The core group consists of primarily characters that are not optional and spend a lot of screen time with Ajna. Dar, Razmi, Tarani, Bautsai, and Zebe in particular spend a lot of time with Ajna or third parties. These characters are fully fleshed out. They have backstories and character arcs, they grow with Ajna, and are usually the ones encouraging her to rethink her decisions. Outside Ajna, the player will get to know them the most, and they are all engaging. Dar's arc is especially compelling since he starts as an antagonist, and let's not forget he murdered Ajna's father, and ends up being more of a hero than Ajna until his sacrifice. I loved pretty much every character that falls into this category, and even the ones I didn't love, I still enjoyed their presence. These characters also lead to the best side quests and some of the game's best moments. Throughout my playthrough, Lab Zero Games impressed me with instances of Kadira and Razmi bantering about who has real lips.
I want to see under your mask. Is your face all weird? Do you have no lips? Let me see.
My lips are perfectly standard, I'll have you know.
Even main plot points get mixed up by characters interjecting. Everything flows with this group, and how they pop in and out of Ajna's mind can make for some funny moments.
So, where are we headed, Hayseed? You seemed pretty keen to get out of Marifa.
Well, we more or less awakened the greatest evil the world has ever known, and she's gonna destroy everything if you don't activate the chakra gates in the Iron Kingdom, Kanu, and Taikram. Sometimes I turn blue and maybe I'm part of Kala, and it turns out I'm adopted and I never even met my mom, but I guess she wasn't my real mom anyway, and I'm carrying all these people in my head, so we just gotta get out of here!
And here I thought you just wanted a ride.
Side note, I totally ship Bautsai and Tarani. They would be great together. One can dream. Moving on. The combat-only group are sub-characters that are mostly optional, and the player will rarely see them on screen unless a quest specifically involves them. This group is a bit of a mixed bag. Some stories are truly entertaining, like Phoebe and Tungar's reluctant romance, while others are completely forgettable, like Zahra and Lanshi. I think my biggest complaint with them is their side quests. For some reason, they often felt longer than any other, and the payoff usually was okay at best. Yes, the side quests unlock that character's full potential on the battlefield, but knowing what I know now, I probably would have skipped most of them and focused on the combatants I knew I would use. As for the villains, honestly pretty forgettable. Ravanavar is stereotypical in every way imaginable. He is evil because he is. He wants to release Kala because resetting the world is the only way to blah 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 blah. After you've seen this type of bad guy once, you've seen them all. Kala is a little bit more interesting. She seems very abstract and one-dimensional until the very end of the game. Her long conversation with Ajna unveils a deity who is anxiety-ridden by her numerous failures as a creator. She views humanity's struggles as her own faults. She's reset the world innumerable times because she can't seem to create a world without pain. Kala would rather start over than try to work through the problems. Ajna helps her see things differently, and ultimately, the big baddie is defeated because she's willing to give another viewpoint a shot. Indivisible is a game built on diversity and unification. There's a reason it has the name it has. All throughout the game, characters from all backgrounds come together to help each other through difficult times. Even looking at character designs, it's easy to see Lab Zero Games tried their best to include as many real-world cultures as they could. It's frankly really impressive how inclusive this game is at its core. More importantly than even character designs are the conversations that occur. Characters often stand up for real-world causes. There are same-sex relationships. Colonialism and its effects are front and center both politically and personally. Capitalism's destruction of the poor and the morality of stealing to help the downtrodden is an entire arc for Compound. Ableism springs up around Yan, a dancer with no arms. Refugees appear in different areas as a consequence of war. Drug addiction is rampant in Tai Krung City. There are a lot of topics Indivisible covers to varying degrees of success. I'm okay if not all the conversations that occur are worthwhile because at least an attempt was made. That's something a lot of larger studios pretend to tackle, but ultimately chicken their way out to a more neutral area. I'm glad a game like this is willing to take a risk, and I think its contribution to gaming is better for it. As I said in my introduction, Indivisible is worth a play for the story and characters alone. The banter both inside and outside Ajna's mind kept things fresh even when other parts of the gameplay dragged. I wish Lab Zero Games would have made accessing some of these story moments easier, but considering it was a first attempt at this style of game, I'm willing to cut them some slack, especially considering how many successes they had with the story. It's unfortunate Lab Zero Games won't get a second shot at it because, ironically, their studio head forced everyone out. Indivisible 2 would be a lovely thing, and I hope someday another studio with some of the original creators can run with all the great things these characters could do. For this section, I'm going to touch on 3 topics: presentation, music, and voice acting. Unless you are only listening to this video, it's pretty obvious that Indivisible is one of the better looking games out there. It's truly a sight to behold. From the lush forest backgrounds to busy city streets, there are flourishes placed in every nook and cranny. I think a lot of people might miss much of the work Lab Zero Games put into this project because a good amount of their artistic talent was poured into these details. But before I dive into that, let's talk about the overall presentation. Indivisible is clearly from the minds who created Skullgirls. Their team of artists have a unique flair to their work, which is especially apparent in the designs of the main characters, as well as NPCs and monsters. There's just a certain look they have. Before I even knew Lab Zero Games developed Indivisible, I recognized their handiwork. Credit to the art team here for creating something wholly theirs. The game borrows heavily from Japanese animation, including some great cutscenes, but I see the biggest influence coming from fighting games like BlazBlue, King of Fighters, and Street Fighter. I say this because the animations remind me of some of these classic 2D pixel art fighters. From idle animations to Ajna swinging her axe, it is very clear Lab Zero Games took their fighting animation knowledge and transposed it into Indivisible. There wasn't a moment where a movement looked janky or a furious flash seemed disconnected from the creature attacking. It just looks beautiful, and I love that I got to play a modern game that just worked without any hiccups. Returning to my earlier statement, Indivisible really stands out to me because of all the little things. Character shadows act appropriately within the environment, bustling NPCs in the backgrounds have their own animations, leaves and flowers drift in the wind, lights glow naturally and illuminate the surrounding area. There's a lot going on in each location if the player chooses to stop and take it in. While running around and fighting baddies, a lot of these subtleties fade into the background, which they should, but I'm still impressed when I look at my footage without the controller in my hand to distract. If I absolutely have to nitpick, I would say the dungeons can feel monotonous from one room to the next, but honestly that's not a big gripe considering that's generally how dungeons are in most games. Okay, moving on to the music. Hiroki Kikuta is the composer for Indivisible. You may recognize him from his work on Secret and Trials of Mana, Koudelka, Soul Calibur 5, and Shining Hearts. For Indivisible, Kikuta delivered a wide-ranging soundtrack with memorable melodies. From the opening epic theme, Eulogia, to the tribal track Dark Rainforest, he does an excellent job matching the tone of whatever scene or area the music accompanies. The battle songs are fierce and keep the player engaged, with some of them sounding appropriately ominous or creepy. The main theme, Indivisible, is a leitmotif throughout the soundtrack, and hearing it crop up in unexpected places cemented the overall feel of the game and music. Kikuta did an excellent job crafting this soundtrack, and it harkens back to older JRPGs where the music was just as important as everything else in the game. Indivisible would not be what it is without his touch, and I'm grateful to add another OST to my collection. Lastly, voice acting. Up to this point in the video, I haven't played much of the voiceover work because, well, it would be hard to hear my own narration. That said, I'm not going to showcase any here, because I feel the performances would lose something when played out of context or without the emotional weight of the story behind them. It would be like cutting out random lines from my favorite movie or TV series and playing them for someone who knows nothing about the show. So instead, I will simply say the voiceover work here is truly great. The main cast shines, with even minor recurring characters like bosses smoothly sliding into the ensemble. I can't express enough how much they made these characters come to life. Without them, I definitely think this game loses a lot of its heart and soul. I know top-notch voice work is becoming the industry standard, but voiceover work is only as good as the writing given to the performers. Here, I want to give a good amount of credit to creative director, quest writer, and art director Mariel Kinuko Cartwright. Her direction and story creation led to such a wonderful cast of characters. I know she didn't work alone in this endeavor, but I wanted to give a special shout out for her contribution. She's also a great follow on Twitter, although just a heads up, she can post NSFW art. I look forward to whatever she works on next, and hopefully she can snag some of her old crew to work with her. So, we're at the end of the review, and I just want to give kind of my final thoughts. First and foremost, do I recommend Indivisible? Yeah, I do. I do recommend Indivisible, with one major caveat, and that is the exploration, which I've stated multiple times throughout, that the exploration kind of puts a damper on all the great things that Lab Zero Games threw into Indivisible. So if you can get around that problem, if you can kind of stomach having to retrace your steps multiple times, you're going to find a really enjoyable experience. You're going to have combat that is just smooth and silky and plays quick and doesn't waste your time. You're going to find characters who are easy to relate to, easy to connect with, and have a surprising amount of depth, especially considering where some of them start out. You're also going to have a unique world with a unique art style. Lab Zero Games just kind of has their own way of putting things together, and frankly, no one else does it quite like them. So you're not going to find another game that's on the same level or style that they have. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other really good 2D games that use kind of a painter art style or an animation art style. Rayman Legends comes to mind, which is also an amazing game. But having said that, again, Indivisible is its own beast, and I can really appreciate how they decided to incorporate a bunch of different cultures and peoples from around the world into this story. I actually learned a lot about where these characters, kind of their mythology, where does it come from? So it's interesting to see all these different aspects get pulled into the story as well. Is all the representation perfect? Probably not. I'm not an expert, but I like that they at least attempted to bring in all these other elements. So yeah, I think Indivisible is definitely worth a play. If you love JRPGs, for sure is something you need to play. If you're really into Metroidvanias and that's about the only thing appealing to you with this, you can move on. I don't think it's gonna win you over unless you have any sort of affiliation or affection towards RPG mechanics and like really heavy story driven games. Anyway, so that is my review. If you really liked it, please hit me with that thumbs up. If you didn't like it, hit me with a thumbs down and a comment letting me know what I could do better for next time. If you really enjoyed yourself, please subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be putting out more content soon, and I would hate for you to miss out on it if you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching, and have yourself a good one.